A UNICEF report warns that thousands of African migrants hoping for a better future in Europe may end up at detention centers in Libya, facing violence, rape, and starvation. World leaders are digesting Donald Trump's first speech to Congress, including his plan to forge a new global trade system. And in our health segment, we'll talk to an expert about influenza, the highly contagious viral infection commonly known as the flu. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Now, the Pentagon has submitted to the White House a preliminary plan to defeat Islamic State terrorists in Iraq and Syria, some 30 days after President Donald Trump requested a new battle strategy. The U.S. air campaign against the extremists is expected to remain a key part of this strategy. And VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb brings us a first-hand look aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier that recently returned to the Mediterranean Sea.
Launch. Catch. Repeat. Jets from the USS George H.W. Bush conducted the first American airstrikes against Islamic State militants in 2014. And 2.5 years and thousands of airstrikes later, the Bush is again a hub for the U.S. offensive. For pilots aboard the carrier, the hours can be long.
It's been about 12 days, so that's about the longest we'd ever go between without having a no-fly day.
But the mission remains clear.
We're very proud and happy to be out here bringing the fight to those guys.
Sailors worked late into the night targeting Islamic State militants. And while the carrier's captain says the operational pace is perfect, during a stop at his quarters, he told VOA they can do more if needed.
So in terms of the number of sorties that we could generate per day or the amount of ordnance that each aircraft is carrying, we're not approaching our top-end capacity right now.
One advantage of having a carrier in the Mediterranean, some Islamic State targets are a shorter flight from here than from land bases in the region that host U.S. military aircraft. The carrier also helps diffuse the fight's workload across the military branches. But even when launching strikes by sea, allies in the fight remain essential.
As we fly our route up through Turkey, then our drop-off into northern Syria and into northern Iraq come out of Turkey. So we have to have that airspace to be able to do this job.
The sailors get a quick break during a port stop in Greece, resetting ahead of more strikes from the Mediterranean and eventually the Persian Gulf.
Well, joining me now to discuss our time aboard the aircraft carrier and the air campaign against the Islamic State is VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb. Welcome back, Carla.
Thanks for having me.
Time. Now, could the new counter-ISIS kind of a plan mean increased amounts of attacks, of raids?
Well, Vincent, it could, but it's too soon to tell. And I was actually asking the top commander in Iraq for the U.S. right now, General Stephen Townsend. I asked him via teleconference yesterday, if he got more money, where would that go? Would that go for more ground troops? Would it go for more supplies for our allies? Or would it go for the air campaign? And he said, you know, I have presented plans to my superiors. I'm not going to get ahead of those. You'll just have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm. And now we know that the USS Bush was delayed. What was going on?
Well, that was due to some extra time in the shipyard. As the captain was explaining to me on the ship, the carriers are deployed for about 6 to 7 months at a time. And that carrier and the carrier before it had spent additional time out being deployed, which of course backs up the shipyard. And then on top of that, they needed more maintenance. So because of that, there were about 2 months without a carrier out there conducting strikes against Islamic State. Now, the Navy will take that. They'll look at that example and say, this is why we need about $2 billion additional dollars for fleet operations and maintenance, because they say that they need to keep up the ships that they have in order to be able to carry out the fight continuously and be ready at home.
And I know it was exciting to be aboard that U.S. aircraft carrier, but you are not the only person who has had that first-hand experience. Someone else.
That's right. President Donald Trump is actually going to be going to Norfolk, Virginia today, and in just a few hours he's going to be giving a speech aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford. That's the newest aircraft carrier that is in Norfolk. He is going to be using that opportunity to tell the world that he wants to rebuild the Navy, and he wants to bring the Navy to about 350 ships in its fleet. Currently, there are about 274, 275. The Navy wants to be at that number, yes, but the Vice of the Navy has warned that they have to maintain the 275, roughly, ships that they have before they can add on additional ships. That's why their top priority is that $2 billion in maintenance that they need. After that, they're also requesting for a few ships. And in addition to that, they'd like to see some more of those F-18 fighter jets. About 20 to 25 more of those is what they're requesting to help with the counter-Islamic State fight.
Just in a few seconds, what's really the advantage of conducting these airstrikes from aboard this ship?
Well, as I mentioned in the package, it helps spread out the strikes that are being conducted across the branches, and also whether the ship is in the Mediterranean Sea or in the Persian Gulf, it gives the U.S. military flexibility to move around when striking targets and get closer to some of those targets.
Carla, thank you very much for your excellent reporting, as always. Well, that's VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb joining us live today. Now, the European Union on Thursday has asked its member states to detain more migrants who have no case for asylum. The move is designed to prevent them from running away before they are deported. The UN says migrant and refugee women and children are facing rampant abuse and exploitation as they make the dangerous journey from sub-Saharan Africa into Libya and across the sea to Europe. Thousands of African migrants trying to cross over to Europe end up at detention centers in Libya. Here, according to the United Nations, they face their worst nightmares: violence, rape, and starvation.
We are treating like chickens. It's like people who I don't know how to call this place. It's not good, very dangerous. They used to beat us. They used to flog us. They don't give us good food. They don't give us good water. The policemen, they harass us.
There were some 250,000 migrants in Libya as of last September. Most of them languish in unsanitary, disease-ridden detention centers. In its report, A Deadly Journey for Children, the Central Mediterranean Migrant Route, UNICEF described the centers as no more than forced labor camps and makeshift prisons.
There's a lot of trafficking for sexual exploitation and abuse. They are children being brought to a number of countries as prostitutes, particularly young girls. And these are networks of criminal gangs. And you just have to look at the various seaboard corners, street corners now to see the number of very young girls that are hustling on the street.
Armed groups have taken effective control of official detention centers for migrants amid the political chaos that now reigns in Libya. Last month, European leaders offered Libya money and other help to try to reduce the numbers departing across the Mediterranean. Aid groups criticized the move, saying such plans expose migrants to further risks and abuses within Libya.
For many of these kids, the only currency they have is their own bodies. And that's what keeps them on the street, hustling. It's what gets them food. It's what gets them airtime for their cell phone cards, which is their only connection to other kids. And I think what we're creating is a human tragedy that is going to last us for generations to come.
Last year, a record 181,000 migrants crossed between Libya and Italy. The United Nations says more than 4,500 people, among them 700 children, drowned attempting to cross. While leaders are now digesting Donald Trump's first speech to Congress, the U.S. president spoke about America's commitment to NATO and his plan to forge a new global trade system. Here's Henry Ridgewell in London.
Donald Trump's speech may have been directed at a domestic audience. The president repeatedly pledged to put America first, but this was a performance watched around the world.
It is American leadership based on vital security interests that we share with our allies all across the globe. We strongly support NATO, an alliance forged through the bonds of 2 world wars that dethroned fascism and the Cold War and defeated communism. But our partners must meet their financial obligations.
The warmer tone has been welcomed, says Ian Bond of the London-based Centre for European Reform, who spoke to VOA via Skype.
He didn't repeat the suggestion that it was obsolete, and he did stress the importance of NATO. But underneath that, he's still talking in terms of NATO countries paying their bills, as though, America is a kind of bodyguard service.
President Trump pledged one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history.
Even many Republicans, I think, are telling him that it's a mistake to gut US overseas development assistance and the State Department in order to fund this very large increase in military spending.
A scaling back of US involvement overseas is likely to be seen as an opportunity for the world's second largest economy, says David Kelly, Director of Research at China Policy, a Beijing-based research group.
Once again, Trump has left large spaces open for China to, in a sense, exploit in diplomatic terms.
Beijing was singled out by Donald Trump as he repeated accusations the global trade system is not benefiting America.
We've lost 60,000 factories since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001.
Trump did not directly mention the travel ban on citizens from 7 Muslim-majority countries that was struck down by the courts. Beyond his vow to extinguish the Islamic State terror group, there was no mention of Africa, an area of focus for his predecessor.
We haven't really seen very much at all out of this administration in this first month on what his Africa policy is going to be. We don't have an Assistant Secretary of State. We have many ambassadorships that are vacant, South Africa being one of them.
The more measured tone of the speech has been generally welcomed, but analysts say many world leaders want more policy detail on President Trump's promise of a new chapter of American greatness. Henry Richwell for VOA News, London.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. And check us out, or check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince Makori. Coming up, a health expert talks about the dangers of the flu. Stay with us.
To present music and a side of American culture that is most important to me, that is a part of who I am. They're going to get some incredible performances. That's one of the things I love, bringing these artists in so you can get to see them do what they do. It's soul music, and that's what music is. It's that which comes from the soul.
It's time for Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 Health correspondent Lino Mudo with a look at the dangers of the flu. Lino.
The World Health Organization says there is a low risk of sustained human-to-human transmission of bird flu in China, where an outbreak of the H7N9 strain is infected and killing people. Outbreaks of the H5 bird flu strains in poultry and wild birds across Europe, Africa and Asia are also raising concern. The WHO says while the human risk of these outbreaks is also low for now, avian viruses need constant monitoring and vigilance is vital. The international health body says constant change is the nature of all influenza viruses, and this makes influenza a persistent and significant threat to public health. Turning to another type of influenza, the flu season is in full swing here in the United States, and experts say it might last until May. Influenza or the flu is a highly contagious viral infection, more severely than the common cold in humans. The World Health Organization says there are 3 large groupings or types of seasonal influenza viruses, A, B, and C. In humans, influenza A and B are the 2 that routinely cause the seasonal flu each year. In temperate climates, the disease tends to occur in the winter months, spreading from person to person through sneezing, coughing, and touching contaminated surfaces. Seasonal influenza viruses can cause mild to severe illness and even death, particularly in some high-risk individuals. Medical experts say one of the best ways to prevent the flu is with vaccination. I spoke to Dr. Ken Redcross, internal medicine specialist and concierge doctor. He discusses the importance of staying virus vigilant to prevent the flu and other sicknesses.
You know, we all talk about the flu season, and it's true, there is the flu season that we need to think about, but there's some other viruses that we need to talk about as well, just to make sure that there's some awareness and some education around it. So when you're talking about influenza, everyone realizes that the flu is bad, but it affects our economy to the tune of about $87 billion each and every year. That's about 30 million patient visits to my office and doctors' offices all across the United States. So it's important. The flu actually peaks in February and can go all the way out into May. So I wanted to make sure everyone realizes the importance of staying virus vigilant. Now, it's important also to come and see us, your doctor, within the first 48 hours if you can, because if you do, there are some medications that we can write with our prescription pad. But I'll be honest, it's tough for patients to kind of know they're dealing with the flu or dealing with the cold. So if you miss that window, there are some homeopathic ingredients called oscillococcinum. See, oscillococcinum has been shown in studies to decrease both the severity and the duration of flu-like symptoms when taken within the first 24 to 48 hours. And oscillococcinum also is good for kids 2 years of age and older. So I love talking about some of those remedies that are closer to the earth instead of thinking about a prescription pad. Now, there's also been some studies to show that vitamin D deficiency may make you more susceptible to also getting the flu. So make sure that your vitamin D levels are checked. And we're talking about the flu now, but there's another virus we should probably talk about that a lot of us don't think we know about, but we do, because this is the one that shuts down daycare centers or shuts down cruise ships, and that's the norovirus. There you go. So you know about it. And so the norovirus, highly infectious, and that's why I have this bar of soap here, because it's important for us to make sure that we're washing our hands regularly with all these viruses, but especially with the norovirus. I also wanted to make sure that we talk about the importance of hydration, because with the norovirus, you get a lot of vomiting and a lot of diarrhea. Thank God it usually only lasts about 48 to 72 hours, but you have to hydrate. And I have coconut water for my folks who say, Doc, I hate drinking water. Well, coconut water is good for you, has a lot of electrolytes, and it's also flavored now, too. And then the other virus you and I talked about, the Coxsackie virus, is a virus, you typically see this in kids 10 years of age or younger. This is the one that causes the hand, foot, and mouth disease. You get a blistering rash on the hands, the foot, and the mouth. The hallmark of disease here tends to be that of fever. Fever can unite all 3 of these. So when you're thinking about Coxsackie virus, there's no direct treatment. It gets better on its own, but you want to make sure, consider things to make sure you lower your temperature externally. Cool washcloths to your forehead, to the back of your neck, that sort of thing.
I wanted you to tell us about the fact that a lot of times when people have fever and they feel like they have the flu, they turn to antibiotics. Yeah. Experts like you say antibiotics is not necessarily the solution.
No, it isn't. And you know what happens? We all get on and we all talk with Dr. Google. And Dr. Google tells us that we need the antibiotic, right? Yes. Well, we don't in this case, because all these 3 viruses that we talked about, they're not amenable to antibiotics. In other words, antibiotics are only for bacteria, not for viruses. So it will do absolutely nothing here. So don't beat your doctor up if your doctor says this is viral, antibiotic won't help. Now, with viruses, it's a lot about supportive care, making sure you're keeping your stress low, making sure that you're not making your immune system more susceptible to illness. So it's really it's a holistic approach in a sense.
Because bacterial is when you really go to the next level in terms of treatment and looking at antibiotics.
Well, you do, but you know what's fascinating is that in a way that I can explain is viruses are kind of already like dead material, if you will. Bacteria are constantly regenerating, and antibiotics take advantage of that. They take advantage that that bacteria wants to build a wall to protect itself. So antibiotics go and poke a hole in that wall so that the bacteria can't do that. Vaccinations can be beneficial for some viruses, but they're a little bit different in the way that you're actually able to kill them.
What are some of the takeaways here?
So I think the important thing is really about being vigilant. So hand washing, making sure you're getting rest, and last but not least, you got to manage your stress, because your stress, when it's heightened, guess what? Your immune system goes south. So you want to make sure that you really have your whole, kind of mental self together too.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Vincent?
A really useful interview, this one, Lenore. Thanks a lot for joining us, and remember to watch for Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Now, the Black Panthers had a lot in common with the liberation movements in Africa during the 1960s, when many countries were freed from colonial rule. The Black Panthers tried to do the same for African Americans in the United States. VOA's Caroline Turner has part 2 of our highlights on the historical documentary, Black Panthers, the Vanguards of the Revolution.
Stanley Nelson's documentary tells the story of the Black Panther Party that grew out of the civil rights movement in America. By the late 1960s, the Black Panthers were protecting their community from police brutality with armed citizen patrols.
What they would do was follow the police. So the police would ride around in their cars, and the Black Panthers would ride around behind them. And if the police did a traffic stop, let's say, or stopped somebody on the street, the Panthers would jump out with their guns drawn, which was perfectly legal, stand 10 or 20 feet back from the police, but have their guns drawn, and as they said, try to make sure that no brutality occurred on the part of the police. This was obviously a revolutionary act.
The organization was increasingly perceived as a dangerous threat by police.
In other cities, the Panthers were under physical attack from police departments. But New York City was going to handle its Panther problem differently. They created a conspiracy case that allowed them to arrest the entire leadership of the New York City Black Panther Party.
A New York grand jury has indicted 21 alleged Black Panthers on charges of plotting several bombings in the city tomorrow.
On April 2nd, 1969, in the pre-dawn raids, 21 Black Panthers were charged with all kinds of terrorist activity.
These are some of the men the police are accusing of being involved in the plot which could have wounded or killed scores of busy New Yorkers. 12 men were arrested today, 2 are already in jail, and 7 more are still at large.
And so the Panther 21 started.
One of the founders of the Black Panthers, Huey Newton, claimed self-defense for killing a policeman after a routine traffic stop. His arrest sparked outrage from sympathetic groups on the political left.
The image that was mobilized to create the Free Huey movement gave Huey almost mythic status in the party. He had become an image and not a man, and that gave him power that ultimately proved dangerous.
He came out focusing on returning to the survival program, the breakfast program, the free health clinics, free food program, and the sickle cell anemia research program. I remember Huey P. Newton saying, the Black Panther Party was not going to last. He said the organization was going to get destroyed. Based on the way we were very aggressive, and we kind of realized that this wasn't going to last long.
I don't agree with saying that the Black Panther Party supports breakfast for children, and that's all that we're about, Don't talk about this other thing. The Black Panther Party is for overthrowing the United States government.
The history of the party remains controversial. The internal conflicts between social programs and revolutionary programs led to infighting and divisiveness within the party. Carolyn Turner, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Friday on Africa 54, we'll have our final installment featuring the highlights of the historical documentary, Black Panthers, Vanguards of the Revolution. Now be sure to tune in. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. It is pomp and color as the Pan-African Film and Television Festival draws to a close this weekend in Burkina Faso. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. In South Sudan, the United Nations begins food distribution to famine-stricken parts of the country, where an estimated 100,000 people are facing starvation. In Egypt, German Chancellor Angela Merkel begins a two-day trip to the country and Tunisia in a push to limit migrant flows to Europe. In Cameroon, non-governmental group The Green Girls Project teaches students how waste can be converted into renewable energy in the country's largest city, Douala. Finally, in Nigeria, OAM Foundation helps marginalized children with albinism get jobs and learn new skills that are not easily accessible to them. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Well, the Pan-African Film and Television Festival, FESPACO, kicked off last Saturday and ends on March 4th in Burkina Faso. More than 160 films are being shown during the festival, each competing for the top prize, Golden Stallion. VOA's Roger Munto has more from Ouagadougou.
Thank you, Vance. The 25th edition of FESPACO, the Pan-African Festival of Film and Television. It's happening this week here in Ouagadougou, where we came last week. And there's a lot of ambiance, as you can see behind me. A lot of people are coming from all over the places. People not only who are movie makers, but people who love movies. People who like to learn. Students from different colleges. They're all coming because more than 150 films are being viewed this week here in Ouagadougou, some of which will be recognized and they'll get prized by the end of this week. We will keep you updated on what's going on here, but I can already tell you, Vince, that so many movie makers came from all over Africa: Morocco, Zambia, DRC, Congo, Brazzaville, Gabon, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana. So many. We're seeing more and more movie makers here in African FESPACO. We spoke with the director of FESPACO, and he told us he's very, very pleased on what's going on here this year. And let's not forget that Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, and Ouagadougou in particular, had a lot of bad moments, bad years. The security is very, very, very tight. And the Minister of Culture that we met, he told us specifically that the government had invested a lot. They have put a lot of money to secure all the people who are coming in town to view those films and to stay until the end of the festival. We'll keep you updated. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks a lot. That was VOA's Roger Munto reporting from Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. And that's our show for today. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to the Voice of America's News Words. Here's a story about journalists keeping secret the names of people who give them information.
Confidential. The ability to keep sources confidential is central to the practice of journalism, and it's very difficult for journalists to be able to do their job, which is upholding our democracy, ensuring that the government is transparent and accountable if they're not allowed to keep their sources confidential.
Confidential means to keep a secret. Sometimes journalists keep secret the names of their sources to prevent them from getting into trouble. Friends also keep information confidential.
Now, when you hear the word confidential, you will know what this news word means.
Find us and friend us on Facebook. VOA Learning English.